The sky above the imperial capital of Ostrave was not merely blue. It was a bruised, magnificent violet, heavy with the gravity of 3 jeweled moons that hung low enough to count the craters on their surfaces. The air smelled of ozone and crushed lilies. It was the day of the ascendance, and the entire planet seemed to be holding its breath. Below the celestial display, the Grand Plaza stretched out like a sea of polished obsidian. It was crowded with 10,000 bodies, a mosaic of galactic nobility and high-ranking officials, all craning their necks toward the floating dais. Above them, banners of liquid silk snapped in the high-altitude wind, displaying the crest of the empire, a silver hawk clutching a burning star. Princess Jara Nyx stood at the center of the dais, feeling less like a sovereign and more like a sacrificial offering. She wore the living gown, a garment woven from bioluminescent fibers and thread-thin circuitry that had been grown rather than sewn. It moved on its own accord, rippling like starlight caught in a net, changing hue to match the ambient radiation of the moons. It was beautiful. It was heavy. It felt like a cage. Under her skin, the starvins pulsed. They were faint, luminous traceries of blue light that mapped her nervous system, a hereditary trait that the aristocracy found unsettling and the common people worshipped as divine. Right now, they throbbed with a headache that sat behind her eyes like a hot coal. "You look radiant," the High Chancellor had told her in the prep room, his smile tight enough to snap a violin string. "Just sign the treaty, smile for the cameras, and let the adults handle the security." Jara shifted her weight, the gown hissing softly as it adjusted to her posture. She looked past the dignitaries, past the rows of golden chairs where the sector dukes sat, and toward the perimeter. That was where the real people were, the workers, the mechanics, the citizens who lived in the shadow of the orbital spires. They were kept back by energy barriers, but she could feel their eyes. They loved her. They believed she could change the stagnation of the empire. They did not know she was about to sign a piece of parchment that would effectively turn their world into a client state of the Terran Federation under the guise of protective supervision. Jara tightened her jaw. She had argued against it for 3 weeks. She had thrown a vase at the Chancellor. She had cited ancient law. It did not matter. The Council had made it clear: sign, or watch your sector starve under trade embargoes. To her right stood the Order of the Chrome Halo. They were the pride of the Empire, 12 knights encased in power armor that gleamed with a mirror finish. The suits were masterpieces of intimidation, designed to look like medieval plate mail but powered by micro-fusion cores. They held plasma lances disguised as heraldic spears, the tips glowing with a lethal, contained heat. Sir Cale Varro stood at the head of the formation. His helmet was off, tucked under one arm, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then eroded by 1,000 years of regret. He was severe, handsome in a terrifying way, and he refused to look at Jara. "We are safe," the Chancellor had promised. "The Chrome Halo has never failed a monarch." Jara looked at Cale's knuckles. They were white around the grip of his lance. He did not look like a man who felt safe. He looked like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. At the very edge of the plaza, well beyond the VIP section and the energy barriers, Dax Rourke leaned against a rusted support pylon and chewed on a nutrient stick that tasted faintly of cardboard and despair. Dax was human, which meant half the people in the crowd looked at him like he was a stray dog that had wandered into a sterile laboratory. He was 30 years old but had eyes that had seen 100 years of bad deals. He wore a flight jacket that had been patched so many times it was more thread than leather, and his boots were magnetic-grade salvage, scuffed and gray. He was not supposed to be here. Officially, He was a contractor hired to haul away debris from a satellite collision in the upper orbit. Unofficially. He was down here because the view was free and he wanted to see where his tax money, if he ever paid taxes, was going. Nice suit, Dax muttered to himself, watching Sir Cale Varro on the giant holographic screens floating above the crowd. I give the servos in that knee joint 20 minutes before they overheat. You are standing too stiff, pal. Dax wiped a crumb from his lip. He had a face that was almost handsome when he wasn't smirking, but he was almost always smirking. It was a defense mechanism. The galaxy was full of things that wanted to eat you, buy you, or arrest you, if you laughed at them first. Sometimes they hesitated long enough for you to find the exit. He scanned the crowd, his brain ticking over details automatically. He noticed the slight lag in the security drone rotation. He noticed the nervous sweat on the Chancellor's brow. He noticed that the princess looked like she was about to scream. She is terrifying, Dax thought, surprised by the sudden jolt of sympathy. And she knows this whole thing is a sham. The ceremony began. Drums rolled like thunder, deep and resonant, vibrating in the chest cavities of everyone present. The Chancellor stepped forward, holding the Treaty of Saul. He began to speak, his voice amplified to boom across the city, talking of unity, of peace, of the benevolent guidance of the human worlds. Dax rolled his eyes. He had been to the human worlds. Benevolent guidance usually meant 30% tariffs and mandatory indentured service for the colonies. Jara stepped forward to receive the stylus. The crowd hushed. The wind died down. The living gown shimmered, turning a pale, mournful violet. Then the sky tore open. It did not begin with a sound. It began with a sickness in the light. The violet sky suddenly bent, the colors inverting into a nausea-inducing spectrum of greens and sickly oranges. Above the dais, space didn't break. It bloomed. A fold bloom. Dax straightened up, dropping his nutrient stick. That is military tech, he thought, his mind racing. That is illegal military tech. The bloom opened like a silent, impossible flower, petals of distorted reality unfurling directly above the princess. The air pressure dropped so sharply that ears popped across the plaza. "Protect the princess," Sir Cale Varro roared, his voice amplified by his suit's speakers. The order of the chrome halo moved. It should have been glorious. They had practiced this drill 1,000 times. The formation of the iron wall. They stepped forward, shields activating, lances lowering to create an impenetrable barrier around Jara. But the universe, Dax noted with a grim grimace, rarely cared about drills. As the knights engaged their combat systems, a high-pitched whine shrieked through the plaza. It was an electronic scream, a jamming signal so powerful it made Dax's teeth ache. The knights froze. It wasn't fear, it was hardware. Dax watched as the magnificent mirror-polished suits locked up. The servos seized. The targeting systems, reliant on the local network, were flooded with garbage data. Sir Cale took a step and stumbled, his leg moving with the jerky, uncoordinated spasm of a marionette with tangled strings. "My HUD is dead," one knight screamed over the open channel, panic cracking his disciplined voice. "I cannot see. Systems are non-responsive." The heroic line disintegrated. They were not warriors anymore. They were men trapped in 2 tons of dead metal. They crashed into each other, lances sparking uselessly against their own shields. From the fold bloom, the attackers descended. They did not use jetpacks or gravity sleds. They descended on cables of spun shadow, moving with a silence that was worse than any battle cry. There were 6 of them, cloaked in material that drank the light, rendering them as human-shaped voids. They moved with impossible synchronization. When one turned ahead, they all turned. When one raised a weapon, 6 weapons rose. They were a hive. A single consciousness poured into 6 bodies. Jara reacted faster than her guards. She didn't scream. She grabbed the heavy ceremonial stylus and drove it into the neck of the first shadow figure that landed near her. The figure didn't even flinch. It just absorbed the blow, grabbed her wrist with a hand that looked like an iron claw, and twisted. Jara dropped to her knees, the living gown flashing a violent, panicked red. "Do something!" She screamed at the knights. Sir Kale was 3 meters away, fighting his own suit. He clawed at his helmet release, his face contorted in agony and shame. "Get up!" he roared at his legs. "Move, damn you!" He fell face first onto the obsidian, his armor screeching like a dying train. The shadow figures surrounded Jara. They did not speak. They did not gloat. They simply attached harnesses to her arms and waist. The fold bloom pulsed above, a hungry mouth waiting to be fed, in the chaos amidst the screaming crowd and the flailing knights. Jara looked up. Her eyes swept past the useless aristocracy, past the frozen chancellor, and locked onto the one person who wasn't screaming. She saw Dax. He was standing on top of a concrete barrier now, balancing precariously, watching the disaster unfold with wide eyes. For a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend. The distance between the dais and the barrier was significant, yet the clarity of the moment was absolute. Dax saw her fear, yes, but beneath the fear, he saw a fury that burned brighter than her star veins. She was not a damsel fainting. She was a queen watching her world fail her. She looked incandescently alive, burning with the realization that every promise ever made to her had been a lie. "Help me," her eyes seemed to say, not a plea, but a demand. Then the cables jerked upward. Jara was yanked into the air, the living gown trailing behind her like a comet tail. The shadow figures ascended with her, disappearing into the sickly light of the fold bloom. The sky snapped shut. The bloom vanished. The violet light returned, indifferent and calm. Silence fell over the plaza. It was the silence of 10,000 people realizing that the impossible had just happened. The God Emperor's lineage, the symbol of the state, was gone. Dax Rourke stood on the barrier, the wind whipping his jacket. He looked at the knights who were just now rebooting, their systems coming back online too late to matter. He looked at Sir Kale, who was pounding his armored fist into the ground, cracking the stone. Dax shook his head. He murmured the words, half to himself, half to the uncaring universe. Every knight failed to save the alien princess. He watched the empty spot in the sky where the fold had been. A strange, twisted sensation curled in his gut. It wasn't heroism. He didn't believe in heroism. It was the professional offense of a mechanic watching someone mistreat a beautiful machine. It was the thrill of a thief seeing a vault door left slightly ajar. A slow, crooked smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes, which remained cold and calculating. Then the human grinned. "Security protocols are active," a voice boomed from the mesmerizing speakers. "Seal the sector. This was human sabotage. Arrest all off-worlders." The trance broke. The crowd panicked. Security drones, now functioning perfectly, descended from the spires, their red eyes scanning for anyone who didn't look like a local citizen. Dax's grin vanished. "Great," he muttered. He hopped down from the barrier just as a drone swept a laser grid over the spot where he had been standing. He didn't run. Running attracted attention. He moved with the flow of the panicked crowd, using a large merchant as a shield, weaving through the gaps in the stampede. He was not a soldier. He was a bottom feeder, a scavenger. And scavengers knew how to disappear. He stripped off his flight jacket, revealing a generic gray work shirt underneath. He ruffled his hair to look more disheveled, more like a terrified tourist. He bumped into a noble, apologized profusely in a bad accent, and stole the man's access badge in the process. Misdirection, humor, the security blind spots. He made it to the edge of the plaza, near the service exits where the catering trucks were idling. The guards were distracted, shouting into their comms, looking for armed commandos, not a guy in a gray shirt looking for a bathroom. Dax slipped behind a stack of crates. He was about to sprint for the service tunnels when something caught his eye. Near the base of the dais where the shadow figures had landed, something was glittering in the dust. The area was cordoned off, but the chaos was absolute. The knights were still arguing with each other. Dax knew he should leave. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to get back to his ship and burn orbit. He cursed softly and scrambled low across the ground, sliding like a baseball player into the shadow of the dais. He reached out and snatched the object. It was heavy, a sigil key. He turned it over in his hand. It wasn't Imperial tech. It wasn't human tech. The metal felt oily and cold, and it hummed with a low vibration that made his fingers numb. It looked ancient, carved with geometries that hurt his eyes if he stared at them too long. It felt like it remembered a universe that existed before physics had decided on the rules. One of the abductors must have dropped it during the struggle. "Hey, you!" a guard shouted, spotting him. Dax jumped up, flashing the stolen access badge. "Sanitation, just cleaning up the, royal mess." The guard hesitated, confused by the audacity. Dax didn't wait. He vaulted a railing, ducked under a hovering news drone, and vanished into the labyrinth of the lower city sewers. He had the key. He had a headache. And he had a very bad feeling that his contract for scrap recovery just got a lot more complicated. Consciousness returned to Jara in fragments. First, the cold. A cold that seeped through the living gown and settled in her marrow. Then, the smell. Sterile metal, old blood, and something sharp like ozone. She opened her eyes. She was floating. There was no up or down. She was drifting in the center of a vast, cavernous chamber that looked less like a room and more like the inside of a rib cage. The walls were made of curved, white struts that resembled bone, interwoven with dark, pulsing machinery. Jara tried to move, but the air was thick, resisting her like water. Gravity flux, she realized. The artificial gravity was unstable, coming and going like the breathing of a dying giant. One moment she was weightless. The next, a crushing heaviness pulled her toward a wall, only to release her again. "Where am I?" she croaked. Her throat felt like she had swallowed glass. "The crown must bond." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was a synthesized chorus, devoid of gender or emotion. Jara spun in the air, her gown tangling around her legs. "Who are you? I demand to speak to the Chancellor. I am Princess Jara Nyx of the Crown Must Bond," the voice repeated louder this time. Lights flickered on the bone walls. She saw them then. Her captors. They were not the shadow figures from the plaza. These were technicians, or something like them. They stood on magnetic platforms attached to the walls, wearing surgical robes of crimson and white. Their faces were hidden behind porcelain masks that had no eyes, only a single vertical slit. "You are political instruments," Jara spat, her fear hardening into the imperious anger she used to survive court. "You are trying to ransom me. You will fail." The Empire does not negotiate with terrorists. The figure closest to her manipulated a console. A beam of energy lashed out, striking Jara in the chest. It wasn't pain. It was worse. It was silence. The beam stripped away her senses, and suddenly she couldn't see the room. She couldn't hear the hum of the machine, and she couldn't feel the cold. She was a consciousness floating in an absolute void. No sight, No sound, no touch. It was the ultimate isolation. It was designed to erase the ego, to break the continuity of self. If you are nothing, you cannot be a princess. If you are nothing, you are just a vessel waiting to be filled. Jara screamed in the void, but she couldn't hear her own voice. She clawed at her own face, but she couldn't feel her hands. She remembered the look on Sir Kale's face as he fell. Failure. She remembered the face of the human on the barrier, the one who had watched, the one who hadn't looked at her like a deity or a victim, but like a woman in trouble. I am Jara, she thought, projecting the words into the darkness of her own mind. I am the star-vein heir. I am not a vessel. The sensory deprivation lasted for what felt like an hour or perhaps a year. Then, abruptly, the world snapped back. She gasped, retching dryly as the gravity twisted her stomach. The crown must bond, the technicians chanted, turning back to their consoles. Jara hung in the air, trembling, sweat cooling on her skin. They weren't going to kill her. They were going to hollow her out. Dax Rourke sat in the cockpit of his ship, the Rust Bucket. It was a terrible name, but he had lost the coin toss to his former co-pilot, who was now dead, so he kept it out of sentimental stubbornness. The ship was docked in a private hangar in the District of Shadows, a lawless zone of the capital where the Imperial patrols rarely ventured. Rain was hammering against the hull, washing away the dust of the coronation. On the dashboard sat the sigil key. It was still humming. Dax had run a diagnostic on it. The computer had screamed and crashed. He had tried to interface it with his datapad. The datapad had melted. It's a map, Dax said to the empty cockpit. Or a gate key. Or a bomb. He looked at the news feed on his secondary monitor. The Chancellor's face was red with fury. Human terrorists have infiltrated the highest levels. Total blockade of the system. Search and seizure of all independent vessels. They were going to lock down the planet. If Dax stayed, he would be found. They would scan his ship, find the anomalies in his log, find the salvage he hadn't declared, and throw him in a hole for 40 years. He should run. He could dump the key into the fusion drive, burn for the outer rim, and never look back. He had a stash of credits on a moon near Jupiter. He could retire. He could drink synthetic rum and laugh about the day the Empire fell on its face. He looked at the key again. Every night failed. He thought about the look in Jara's eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization that the system was broken. The nights were toys. The government was a sham. Dax Rourke was a crook, a liar, and a coward when the odds were bad. But he hated a rigged game. And this game was rigged so hard it made his teeth hurt. The Empire thought only it played these games. They thought power was about armies and treaties and knights in shining armor. They didn't know about the game of the gutter, the game of leverage, of picking locks, of fighting dirty. If he left her there, whoever took her would use her. They would turn her into a weapon or a trophy, and the human race would get the blame, leading to a war that would burn a dozen worlds. He wasn't noble, he wasn't chosen. He was just the only guy in the room who knew how to pick a lock. Dax sighed, a long, heavy exhale that emptied his lungs. Computer, he said. Working. The ship's AI chirped, sounding far too cheerful. Contact the broker. Tell him I'm selling the legal identity of this vessel. Are you certain, Dax? That will render us a ghost ship. We will have no docking rights, no legal protection. We will be shot on sight in civilized space. I know, Dax said, his fingers tracing the strange geometry of the sigil key. Get me the credits. I need to buy a route into the forbidden sector. But why? Dax leaned back in his pilot's chair, the leather creaking. He picked up the key and tossed it in the air, catching it with a snap of his wrist. "Because," he said, looking at the rain streaking the glass, "the princess needs a ride, and I think I'm the only one crazy enough to go get her." He fired the engines. The rust bucket shuddered, lifted off the pad, and turned its nose toward the dark, cold vacuum of the unknown. The human grinned again, and this time, it was a promise. The rust bucket shuddered as it locked into the magnetic clamps of the gyre, a sprawling, chaotic ring of debris orbiting a dead gas giant. This was not a place found on imperial star charts. It was a conglomeration of the lost and the found, a rotating shantytown welded together from the hulls of decommissioned battleships and stolen cargo freighters. Dax Rourke checked his blaster, slid the sigil key into his breast pocket, and stepped out into the airlock. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, curry, and ozone. He moved through the market districts, keeping his head down. The gyre was an assault on the senses. Vendors stood behind stalls made of shimmering force fields, hawking wares that were illegal in 12 systems. To his left, a cyborg with glass skin was selling bottled memories, bright, swirling vapors in vials labeled First Kiss and Mother's Forgiveness. To his right, a stall offered illegal star maps tattooed onto living salamanders. Dax wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here for information. He pushed through a curtain of hanging beads made from dried ocular nerves and entered the velvet vertex. It was a lounge where the gravity was set to half standard, allowing patrons to float in cushioned booths while sipping neon-colored intoxicants. At the back, lounging on a divan of floating silk, was Madame Vex. She was a twi-human hybrid, beautiful in a way that made your eyes hurt, with skin the color of polished obsidian and cybernetic eyes that zoomed and focused like camera lenses. Dax. "Darling," Vex purred, her voice vibrating in the lower registers. "You look terrible. Have you been sleeping in a garbage chute again? Hello to you too." "Vex," Dax said, sliding into the booth opposite her. He grabbed a floating grape from a bowl and popped it into his mouth. "I need you to look at something, and keep your hands where I can see them. I know you like to pick pockets." Vex laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "I only pick the pockets of men I intend to sleep with." "Dax, consider it a deposit." She leaned forward, the silk of her robe slipping to reveal a shoulder etched with circuit tattoos. "What do you have?" Dax placed the sigil key on the table. Vex stopped smiling. Her cybernetic eyes whirred, extending telescopic lenses to examine the artifact. She didn't touch it. She hovered her hand over it, sensing the energy. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, the flirtation gone. "Found it," Dax said. "Does it mean anything to you?" "It means death." "Dax." Vex looked up, her face serious. "This is not just old tech, this is council tech. The Council of 9 Lanterns." Dax frowned. "I thought they were a myth. Spooky stories to scare junior senators." "They are very real," Vex said softly. "They are the shadow hand behind the throne. They steer the empire by manufacturing crises, wars, plagues, economic collapses. They engineer them to keep the population scared and dependent. If you have a key to one of their facilities, Dax, you are walking around with a target on your forehead the size of a moon." Dax took the key back, his fingers brushing the cold metal. "So, the kidnapping wasn't a blunder. It was a setup." Vex reached out, her hand lingering on his wrist. Her nails were sharp, painted with holographic lacquer. "Dax, listen to me. Sell the key. Run to the outer rim. I can come with you. We could be very good at being bad together." Dax looked at her. For a second, the offer was tempting. Vex was dangerous, but she was real. I can't, he said, pulling his hand away with a charming, crooked grin. I have a date with a princess. Vex sighed, leaning back. You always did have a savior complex disguised as greed. Get out of here. Rourke, before I sell your location to the bounty hunters just to teach you a lesson. Dax winked at her. You love me too much to kill me. Vex. He left the lounge, his mind racing. The Council of Nine Lanterns. This wasn't just a rogue faction, it was the architects of the Empire itself eating their own tail. Millions of kilometers away, inside the Bone Cathedral. Princess Jara Nyx sat on the floor of her cell. The sensory deprivation sessions had stopped, replaced by something more insidious. The wall of her cell had become a screen, for hours. She was forced to watch broadcasts from the capital. She saw crowds burning effigies of her in the streets. She saw interviews with citizens she had sworn to protect, their faces twisted with hate. She is a curse, a woman screamed on the screen, holding a starving child. She brings the void. The star veins are the mark of the devil. Jara hugged her knees to her chest. The living gown was dull, a matte gray fabric that hung lifelessly on her frame. It is doctored, she whispered to herself. It is propaganda. But the doubt was a worm, burrowing deep. What if it wasn't? What if they truly hated her? She had spent her life in towers, separated by glass and guards. Had she ever really known them? The door to her cell hissed open. Jara scrambled back, bracing herself for the technicians. But it wasn't a faceless drone that entered. It was a woman. She was tall, with skin the color of pale lilac and eyes that held the horizontal pupils of the aquatic nobility from the sector of tides. She wore a simple gray prisoner's tunic, yet she wore it with the elegance of a ball gown. Peace, child, the woman said, her voice warm and melodic. I am not one of them. Jara didn't relax. Who are you? I am Lady Maria, the woman said, stepping inside. The door sealed behind her. I was the Duchess of the Western Archipelagos until I refused the Council's tax hikes. They brought me here 3 months ago. Maria moved to the small synthesizer in the corner of the room and pressed a sequence of buttons. A moment later, she produced 2 cups of steaming liquid. It is not real tea, Maria said, offering a cup to Jara. It tastes like hot water and optimism. But it is warm. Jara hesitated, then took the cup. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers. Why are you here? Jara asked. To make sure you do not break, Maria said gently. She sat on the floor, crossing her legs gracefully. They want you to feel alone. Jara, they want you to believe the world has rejected you so that you will accept their bond just to feel connected to something again. Jara looked at the screen, where a hologram of Sir Cale Varro was announcing that the search for the princess was being scaled back due to lack of evidence. They failed me, Jara whispered. No, Maria corrected. They were designed to fail you. There is a difference. Maria reached out and touched Jara's arm. Her hand was soft, maternal. Forget the princess, Maria said. Who is the woman underneath? What does she want? Jara looked into her tea. I want to eat an apple without someone testing it for poison. I want to dance without wondering if my partner is an assassin. I want to be seen, not as a symbol, just as Jara. Maria smiled, a sad, knowing expression. Then hold on to that hunger. Jara, it is the only thing that will keep you sane in this place. Dax Rourke was currently hanging upside down by his ankles from a ventilation duct, trying to hack a maglock with a piece of chewing gum and a sonic screwdriver. He was on the moon of Prima Core, the data hub of the sector. He had used the credits from selling his ship's identity to buy a forged Imperial clearance badge. The badge identified him as Inspector Void, a Level 5 sanitation officer. It was a ridiculous cover, but Dax found that nobody ever looked closely at the guy coming to fix the toilets. He dropped from the duct, landing silently in the corridor of the Imperial Archive. The archive was a temple of data. Towering servers rose into the gloom like basalt columns, humming with the history of 1,000 worlds. Neon lights pulsed along the floor, guiding him toward the restricted wing. Dax moved fast. He knew he had 10 minutes before the perimeter sweep. He located a terminal and jammed a data spike into the port. His hands flew across the holographic keyboard. Come on, show me the dirty laundry," he muttered. He input the frequency of the sigil key. The terminal flashed red, then green. A file opened. Project, Symbiote Sovereignty. Dax read the abstract, and the blood drained from his face. It wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a biological coup. The document detailed the creation of a biosymbiotic crown, a living organism engineered to bond with the neural pathways of the royal bloodline. Once bonded, the host would retain their memories and personality, but their volition, their ability to choose, would be overridden by a pheromonal command signal broadcast by the Council. And it got worse. The host would amplify this signal, broadcasting a microfield of obedience to anyone in their physical presence. They don't want a hostage, Dax realized, horror dawning on him. They want a puppet that makes everyone else a puppet. If she puts that crown on, she enslaves her entire people just by standing in the room. Freeze. Dax spun around. 2 archive guardians stood at the end of the aisle. They were sleek, faceless androids with stun batons crackling with blue electricity. "Sanitation," Dax yelled, throwing his hands up. "There is a massive leak in the, logic pipes. Very messy." The guardians didn't pause. They charged. Dax didn't fight. He ran. He sprinted down the aisle, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. He took a sharp left, sliding under a server rack just as a stun bolt scorched the metal where his head had been. He burst out into the main atrium, a massive vertical shaft filled with flying data drones and neon signage. He jumped onto a gravity lift, slamming his fist on the ascend button. The lift shot upward. The guardians pursued on jet boots. "This is going poorly," Dax yelled at no one in particular. The lift jammed halfway up. Dax looked up. The exit was 50 feet above him. He looked down. The guardians were closing in. He looked at the wall of the shaft. It was lined with maintenance rungs, but they were coated in coolant slime. Improvisation time. Dax kicked off his boots. They were magnetic, heavy, and clunky. He tied the laces together in a split second and swung them like a bolo. "Hey, tin cans, catch!" He hurled the boots downward. The magnets caught the lead guardian in the chest, the sudden weight and magnetic interference sending the android spinning out of control into its partner. They crashed into the wall in a tangle of sparks and metal limbs. Dax didn't wait to admire his aim. He scrambled up the slime-slicked rungs in his socks, slipping, cursing, and cracking jokes to keep the panic at bay. "Great work." "Dax," he panted. "You are now a fugitive on a military moon. You know a secret that could get you executed twice, and you are running around in your socks. Very professional." He burst onto the roof of the archive, the wind whipping his hair. Below him, the city of vertical canals stretched out, a neon-drenched Venice of the future. He stole a hover skiff from a startled courier, apologized as he shoved the man out, and gunned the engine. As he sped away into the traffic, he looked down at his sock-clad feet and laughed. It was a hysterical, terrified sound. He knew where she was. The file had coordinates. The prison structure drifted in the void of the deep expanse, a region of space where stars went to die. It looked like a cancerous growth on the fabric of reality, a cathedral of bone and jagged metal rotating slowly. Dax's approach was not subtle, but it was small. He had used the last of his credits to bribe a wormgate operator to drop him out of hyperspace just outside the structure's sensor range. He approached in a modified EVA suit he had cobbled together from salvage. It was a monstrosity. The left arm was a piece of a chrome Halo Knight's gauntlet, painted matte black. The chest piece was from a deep-sea mining rig, reinforced to withstand crushing pressure. The helmet was a vintage pilot's bucket with a welded faceplate. He looked like a medieval knight assembled in a junkyard. He latched onto the outer hull of the prison using magnetic grapples, stolen from the courier's skiff. He used a laser cutter to slice through a maintenance hatch. The air rushed out, then stabilized as he slipped inside. He was in. The interior of the prison was a nightmare of shifting gravity. Corridors twisted like intestines. Up became down without warning. Dax moved carefully, checking his scanner. He had programmed the sigil key's frequency into his HUD. It led him deeper, past patrolling drones and silent, masked technicians. He found the containment sector. Jara was in a chamber that flickered. 1 second, the furniture was on the floor. The next, it was on the ceiling. Dax overrode the door lock. It took him 3 tries and a lot of swearing, but the seal finally hissed and retracted. Jara was standing in the center of the room, holding a shard of metal she had pried from the synthesizer. She looked exhausted, her hair wild, her eyes feral. When the door opened, she didn't cringe. She raised the shard, ready to kill. Dax stepped in, clanking loudly in his mismatched armor. He saw the shard. He saw the lethal intent in her posture. He stopped, raised his armored hands, and executed a clumsy, ridiculous bow that was made even more awkward by the magnetic boots he had stolen from the courier. "Your Highness," he said, his voice tinny through the helmet speaker. "Please don't stab me. This suit isn't under warranty." Jara blinked. The ferocity wavered for a fraction of a second, replaced by confusion. "You?" she whispered. "The human from the plaza?" Dax popped the seal on his helmet and pulled it off. He shook his head, messy hair falling over his forehead. He grinned, but his eyes were scanning the hallway behind him. "Dax Rourke, salvage expert, bad influence, and currently your only ride home." Jara didn't lower the shard. "Why are you here? How did you get past the fleet?" Dax tapped the sigil key in his pocket. "Stole a key, bribed a pirate, lost my boots. It's been a whole Tuesday. Look, we can do the exposition later. Right now. We have about 4 minutes before the alarm loop resets." Jara looked at him. She saw the sweat on his face. She saw the makeshift, ugly armor. She saw the way his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He wasn't a knight. He was a mess, and he was the only person who would come for her. She lowered the shard. "If this is a trap," she said, her voice regaining its royal steel, "I will kill you with a spoon." Dax laughed, a genuine sound. "That's the spirit. Now, come on, we have to run." He grabbed her hand. The contact was electric, wasn't romantic, not yet. It was the shock of 2 desperate people connecting in the dark. The alarm screamed. They ran. The corridors of the prison became a funhouse of terror. Gravity shifted every 30 seconds. One moment they were sprinting along the floor, the next, the gravity flipped, and they were falling toward the ceiling. Jara adapted instantly. Her life of court dances and zero-G training kicked in. She moved like water, pivoting in midair, landing on walls, using her momentum to swing around corners. Dax was less graceful. He fought the gravity. He slammed into bulkheads, grunted, and kept moving. He was a brawler in a ballerina's world. Technicians emerged from the walls, firing stun beams. Dax raised his stolen night gauntlet. It still had a charge. He fired a pulse of kinetic force, blasting a technician backward into a control panel. "Keep moving," Dax yelled. They reached a central junction, a massive vertical shaft with rotating rings. A drone descended, blocking their path. It was a war kite, armed with razor wings. Dax shoved Jara behind him. He drew his blaster, but the drone was too fast. It swooped, its wing clipping Dax's shoulder, tearing through the mining suit. Dax shouted in pain but didn't drop. He tackled the drone in midair as gravity failed completely. They spun in the zero-G man and machine wrestling. Dax jammed his armored fist into the drone's sensor array, crunching glass and circuitry. The drone sparked and died. Dax kicked away from the wreckage, breathing hard, blood floating in droplets around him. Jara caught him, grabbing his harness and pulling him toward a maintenance alcove. She dragged him inside and hit the emergency seal. The noise of the alarms muffled instantly. They were in a tiny, dark space, barely big enough for two people. They floated in the dark, their bodies bumping against each other. Dax groaned, clutching his shoulder. "Are you dying?" Jara asked, her voice tight. "Not today," Dax wheezed. He looked at her. Her face was inches from his. In the dim light of his suit's indicators, she looked ethereal. Her starvins were pulsing with a soft, bioluminescent rhythm, matching her heartbeat. "You fight well for a princess," Dax murmured. "You fight like a drunk heavy lifter," Jara retorted, but her hands were hovering over his injury, checking the depth of the cut. She looked up, and their eyes met. The adrenaline was still pumping through their veins, a chemical cocktail of fear and survival. In the silence, that energy shifted. It became heat. It became a sudden, overwhelming awareness of the other person's breath, of the proximity of their skin. Jara didn't pull away. She looked at this human, this thief with the crooked grin and the bleeding shoulder, and she felt a hunger that had nothing to do with food. It was a hunger to be known. Dax stared at her. He had spent his life objectifying royalty, seeing them as targets or punchlines. But looking at her now, with dirt on her cheek and fire in her eyes, he didn't see a title. He saw a storm. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. Jara's breath hitched. She placed a hand on his chest, over the scavenged armor. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered. Her voice shook. "Don't look at me like I'm a prize you stole." Dax froze. He could have made a joke. He could have deflected, but he didn't. He reached up, his human hand, dirty, scarred, warm, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, terrifyingly so. "I'm not looking at a prize." "Jara," he said softly, using her name for the first time without a title. "I'm looking at the partner who is going to help me steal a ship." The tension held for a second longer. A wire pulled taut enough to sing. Then Jara nodded, stepping back, putting a sliver of distance between them. "Good," she said, though her pulse was hammering against her ribs. "Then let us steal a ship." They blew the hatch on the alcove and moved. They reached the hangar bay. It was guarded by 3 technicians, but Dax and Jara moved as a team now. Dax provided covering fire. Jara used her knowledge of Imperial overrides to hack the door controls, venting the atmosphere in the guard booth and forcing them to retreat. They sprinted toward a sleek black shuttle sitting on the pad. Dax hotwired the airlock. They scrambled inside. "Strap in!" Dax yelled, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. Jara buckled herself into the co-pilot chair. "Can you fly this? It has wings and an engine." Dax grinned, his hands flying over the alien controls. "I can fly a brick if it is thrust." He slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle blasted out of the hangar. tearing through the magnetic containment field. The prison structure receded behind them, shrinking into the star field. Dax let out a whoop of triumph. We did it. We actually did it. Jara didn't cheer. She was staring at the tactical display on the dashboard. Dax, she said, her voice cold. Look at the perimeter defense logs. Dax looked. The automated turrets on the prison hull. They had tracked the shuttle. They had locked on, and they hadn't fired. They let us go, Jara whispered. Dax's grin faded. Why? He asked. Jara touched her own neck, where the technicians had injected her with trackers and stimulants. Because I am not just a prisoner anymore, she said, her eyes dark with realization. I am a carrier. The prison wasn't meant to hold me forever. Dax, it was a finishing school. They finished the prep work. Now they want me back in the world. Dax gripped the controls, his knuckles white. Then let's make sure they regret that, he said. He punched the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into lines of infinite light, and the shuttle vanished into the fold, carrying a princess who was done being saved, and a thief who was just beginning to understand what he had stolen. The shuttle died not with a roar, but with a screech of tearing metal that sounded uncomfortably like a living thing in pain. They hit the atmosphere of the relic world, a planet known only as Sepulchre 4, at an angle that stripped the heat shielding off the port wing in sheets of burning gold. Dax wrestled with the yoke, his hands slick with blood, his face a mask of grim concentration. Hold on, he shouted over the screaming hull. Jara did not scream. She gripped the co-pilot's harness, her knuckles white, her eyes wide and fixed on the rushing ground. They clipped the top of a metallic forest. These were not trees of wood and leaf, but towering rusted spires of iron and copper, remnants of a civilization that had paved over its biosphere 10,000 years ago. The shuttle sheared through them, sending up showers of sparks, before slamming into a furrow of gray dust. The impact threw them forward, the safety harnesses locking hard enough to bruise bone. Silence followed. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the ticking of cooling engines and the wind outside. But the wind was strange. As it moved through the hollow, flute-like trunks of the metallic trees, it created a sound. It was a low, resonant chime, a planet-wide church bell ringing for a funeral that never ended. Dax? Jara whispered. Dax did not answer. He was slumped over the controls, the scavenged night armor digging into his side. A jagged piece of the console had ruptured during the crash, slicing through the gap in his plating near the ribs. Jara unbuckled frantically. She fell out of her seat, crawling over the debris to reach him. Dax! He groaned, his head lolling back. His face was gray, the crooked grin wiped clean. I am okay, he wheezed, the words bubbling up with a cough, just parked it a little hard. You are bleeding, Jara said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a fierce, terrified anger. She ripped the emergency medkit from the bulkhead. She dragged him out of the pilot's chair. He was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline gave her the strength of a loader droid. She pulled him through the twisted airlock and out onto the surface of the planet. The air was breathable but tasted of copper. The sky was a swirling bruise of dark clouds. All around them, the metal trees rang, bong, 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 a mournful, maddening rhythm. Jara laid him under the shelter of a bent wing. She stripped off his chest plate, her hands shaking as she exposed the wound. It was deep. Dax watched her through half-lidded eyes. He saw the way she bit her lip, the way her hands moved with a competence he hadn't expected. She wasn't a princess right now. She was just a woman trying to keep a man from dying in the dirt. You are ruining your dress, Dax murmured. Shut up, Jara snapped, applying a pressure bandage. Hold this, Dax hissed as she tightened the seal. He looked at her. Her living gown was torn, stained with grease and his blood. The starvins beneath her skin were glowing brighter than he had ever seen them, pulsing in time with her distress. "Jara," he said, his voice clearer now that the pain meds were kicking in. "Your skin, it is lighting up the whole crash site." Jara paused. She looked down at her arms. The blue traceries were blazing, illuminating the gray dust like neon veins. "I cannot help it," she said quietly. She finished the bandage and sat back, wiping her hands on her thighs. "It is a reaction to the technology here." Dax frowned, trying to sit up, then deciding against it. "What technology? This place is a graveyard." "It is a machine," Jara corrected. She looked out at the ringing forest. "My bloodline. The Starvins. They are not just decorative, Dax. They are an interface." Dax watched her. "A secret, a big one. The first emperors," Jara continued, her voice competing with the wind chimes. "They did not conquer the galaxy with armies. They found ancient technology, pre-empire tech, but they could not control it. So they altered themselves. They spliced the command codes into their DNA. That is what the Starvanes are. I am a universal key. That is why the Council wants me. Not just for legitimacy, but because I can turn on machines that have been asleep for 5,000 years." Dax looked at the sigil key in his pocket, then at her. "You are a walking USB port for doomsday weapons," he said. Jara let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a jagged sound, but it was real. Yes, that is one way to put it. She looked at him then, really looked at him. The humor faded. "Why did you come back for me, Dax?" she asked. "And do not tell me it was for the money. You sold your ship. You have nothing." Dax looked away, staring at the rusted horizon. The wind chimed again. "I am not a hero, Jara," he said softly. "I know," she said. "You are a thief, but you are here." Dax closed his eyes. 5 years ago, I was running a blockade runner near the Vale. We picked up a distress signal. A transport full of refugees, engine failure, falling into a gravity well. He swallowed hard. I had a full cargo hold, illegal munitions. If I stopped, the patrol drones would scan me. I would lose the cargo. I would go to prison. Jara waited. "So I didn't stop," Dax whispered. "I jammed the signal and I told my crew it was a ghost echo. We jumped to hyperspace." He opened his eyes. They were wet. I saw the explosion on the rear sensors before we jumped. 300 people. The silence between them was heavier than the gravity of the planet. "That is why I grin," Dax said, his voice cracking. "If I stop laughing, I hear them screaming. I wear the grin so the guilt cannot bite me, but it bites anyway." Jara moved. She didn't pull away. She leaned forward and took his hand. Her skin was cool, her grip firm. She laced her fingers through his. "You came back this time," she said. "I almost didn't," Dax admitted. "But you did." She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. They sat there in the wreckage, two broken things on a broken world, holding on to each other while the metal trees sang their endless, lonely song. They didn't have long to rest. The sky tore open 2 hours later. It wasn't a fold bloom this time. It was the screaming re-entry of drop pods. The Empire had tracked the shuttle's ion trail. "They are here!" Dax yelled, scrambling up. The pain in his side was a dull roar, but the adrenaline drowned it out. He grabbed Jara and they ran into the metallic forest. The ground was uneven, littered with gears the size of houses and cables thick as pythons. Behind them, the drop pods slammed into the dust. The ramps hissed open. Chrome halo knights emerged. They looked different here. In the gloom of Sepulchre 4, their mirror-polished armor reflected the storm clouds, turning them into walking thunderstorms. They moved with terrifying speed, their servos whining. Target acquired. A voice boomed. Subject, contaminated. Subject, kidnapper. Sanction authorized. They are not here to rescue you, Dax shouted, pulling Jara behind a rusted pylon. They are here to sanitize the scene. Plasma fire erupted. Bolts of searing white heat slashed through the air, melting the metallic trees into slag. Dax fired back with his blaster, but the bolts bounced harmlessly off the knight's shields. We need to move. Higher ground. Jara pointed toward a ridge of jagged metal. They scrambled up the slope. The knights pursued, relentless and heavy. At the top of the ridge, they found themselves cornered. A sheer drop awaited them on the other side, a canyon filled with churning acidic fog. A single figure jet-packed up to the ridge, landing with a heavy thud that cracked the metal ground. It was Sir Cale Varro, his helmet faceplate retracted. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and something that looked like madness. Stop, Cale ordered. He raised his hand, signaling the other knights to hold fire. Jara stepped forward, her chin high. Sir Cale, you swore an oath to protect my blood. The oath is dead. Princess, Cale said, his voice flat. The Chancellor has declared you unfit, contaminated by alien radicalization. Your cousin has been named regent. Jara went pale. My cousin is a child. He is a signature, Cale said. That is all they need. He took a step forward, his gauntlets clanking. I tried to save you, Jara, Cale said, his voice dropping to a desperate plea. On the dais, I tried to move. I swear it. My suit, the protocol, it locked me out. I was a passenger in my own body. Dax was watching Cale closely. He wasn't looking at the knight's face, he was looking at his hands. The left hand was trembling, a micro-tremor. He is lying, Dax thought. No, not lying. He is reciting. You are telling us this why? Dax asked aloud, stepping between Cale and Jara. If you are here to kill us, just pull the trigger. Cale's eyes flicked to Dax. There was hatred there, but also envy. I am here to offer mercy, Cale said. Come with me, Jara. I can get you into a monastery tower in the northern reach. You can live, you just cannot rule. And him? Jara asked, nodding at Dax. Cale's jaw tightened. The kidnapper dies. That is the price. Jara didn't hesitate. No, Cale sighed. It sounded like a man giving up his soul. Then you both die. He raised his lance. Suddenly, a massive holographic projection lit up the sky above them. It overrode the night's comms, blasting audio across the entire valley. It was Lady Maria. She looked regal, sitting in a council chamber, wearing robes of state. Citizens of the Empire, the broadcast boomed. We have received tragic confirmation. The princess has fallen, but the crown must endure. Jara stared at the giant, ghostly face of the woman who had made her tea. Mireia smiled on the screen. It was the same warm, maternal smile she had used in the cell. Jara? Maria's voice cut through a private channel that blasted from Dax's stolen comms unit. I know you are listening, my dear. Do not fight it. The symbiote crown was not just a piece of jewelry. We seeded the receptor genes in your mother's bloodline 40 years ago. You were born to be a host. It is biology. It is destiny. Come home. The betrayal hit Jara harder than the crash. The kindness in the cell. It was a test, a calibration. Dax saw the devastation on her face. He grabbed her shoulder. She is lying, Dax said fiercely. She wants you to give up. Look at me. Jara looked at him. We are not done, Dax said. He turned to Kale. You said your suit locked you out? Kale blinked. Yes. Then why are you hesitating now? Dax asked. Kale froze. Dax grabbed a canister from his belt, a flashbang grenade he had swiped from the prison. Catch! He threw it. It exploded in a blinding flash of magnesium white. Jump! Dax yelled. They didn't jump up. They jumped down. Into the acidic fog. They survived the fall by landing on a maintenance barge drifting through the fog layer. The barge was automated, carrying scrap to an orbital processing station. Dax hotwired the controls, overriding the destination. Where are we going? Jara asked. She was shivering, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. There is only one place left, Dax said. The Mirror Choir. The barge carried them up, out of the atmosphere toward a derelict structure orbiting the planet's second moon. It was the Basilica of Echoes, an ancient cathedral-like station built by the same race that had paved the planet. Legend said it contained the Mirror Choir, a sonic weapon designed to shatter mental control frequencies. They docked the barge at a crumbling airlock. The interior of the basilica was not dark. It was lit by shifting, impossible colors. The air hummed with a sound that felt like memories trying to break into the present. This place, Jara whispered. It feels like a dream. The physics here were loose, corridors stretched and compressed. As they walked, they heard echoes of conversations that hadn't happened yet. They saw ghostly afterimages of themselves walking 5 seconds ahead. Dax saw a flicker of his dead crew from the refugee ship standing in a doorway, staring at him with accusing eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut and kept walking. Ignore it, he grated out. It is psych-reactive atmosphere. It shows you what you fear. They reached the sanctuary, the central control room. It was a massive dome of stained glass that looked out onto the stars. In the center stood the console for the Mirror Choir, a complex organ of crystal and light. Dax sealed the heavy blast doors behind them. They were safe for the moment. The nights would take hours to cut through. They were alone. The silence in the sanctuary was absolute. The psychological warping stopped, leaving only a heavy, intimate quiet. Jara leaned against the console, her back to Dax. She looked at the stars. My cousin is Regent, she said softly. Maria is the puppet master, and I am nothing. Just a biological lock waiting to be turned. Dax walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He stood close enough that she could feel his heat. You are not nothing, he said. Jara turned. Her eyes were bright, fierce, and desperate. Then what am I, Dax? I have no throne. I have no army. I have a dress that is falling apart and a head full of ghosts. You are the woman who stabbed a shadow assassin with a pen, Dax said. You are the woman who dragged me out of a burning shuttle. Jara looked up at him. The distance between them was vanishing. The danger outside, the nights, the council, the galaxy, felt a million light-years away. There was only this room, this man, this moment. I am tired of being a symbol, she whispered. I want something that is mine, something I choose, not for the Empire, not for the bloodline. For me. She took a step closer. Dax's breath hitched. He saw the intent in her eyes. It terrified him more than the chrome halo. Jara. She reached out, her hands resting on the chest of his scavenged armor. She slid them up, over the cold metal to the warm skin of his neck. Don't, Dax breathed. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. Why? Jara challenged, her voice low and smoky. Are you afraid? Yes, Dax admitted. He didn't back away. He couldn't. I am afraid because you are desperate, he said, and I am the only thing here. I do not want to be another thing you use to feel alive. Jara's eyes softened. She ran her thumb along the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble. I am not using you. Dax. She pulled him closer. Dax resisted for a heartbeat, a single agonizing second where his conscience warred with a hunger that had been growing since he saw her on that dais. He was a thief. He took things. But he couldn't take this. Not if it was just grief masked as desire. But looking into her eyes, he didn't see grief. He saw a challenge. He saw a woman claiming her own want. He let out a shuddering breath and surrendered. His hands came up, cupping her face, his thumbs tracing the glowing lines of the starvins on her cheeks. Jara, he whispered, as if the name was a prayer he wasn't allowed to say. She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the desperate, starving contact of two people standing on the edge of a cliff. Jara kissed him with a fierce possession, tasting the copper of the air and the salt of his sweat. Dax groaned low in his throat, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her deeper. The chemistry that had been sparking between them, the banter, the friction, ignited into a blaze. She pushed him back against the crystal console. The contact was electric, taboo. Alien princess and human trash. The future empress and the smuggler. It shouldn't work. It should be wrong. But it felt like the only right thing in the universe. Jara's hands fumbled with the clasps of his armor. She needed skin. She needed to feel the reality of him. Dax stopped her hands. He gripped her wrists, not roughly but firmly. He pulled back, gasping for air, his forehead resting against hers. Wait, he panted. Jara looked at him, her eyes blown wide, her chest heaving. Why? Because, Dax said, his voice shaking, if we do this, if we cross this line, I cannot go back to being just your driver. And I need to know that you are not doing this just because you think you are going to die tomorrow. Jara stared at him. She saw the raw vulnerability in his face. He wasn't rejecting her. He was protecting her agency, even now, especially now. I am not doing this because I am dying, she said fiercely. I am doing this because for the first time in my life I am living. She leaned in again, brushing her lips against his. But you are right, she whispered. Not here, not like this. She rested her head on his shoulder, her body trembling against his. The heat remained, a simmering, potent promise. It hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. They hadn't crossed the final line, but they had obliterated the border. Hold me, she commanded softly. Just hold me. Dax wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck. He held her like she was the only anchor in a storm. They stood there for a long time, the desire settling into a deep, resonant ache that bound them closer than any physical act could have. The blast doors shuddered. A plasma drill was cutting through the lock. Sparks showered into the room. They are here, Dax said, pulling away. The moment was broken, but the connection remained. He looked at her, and the crooked grin returned. But it was softer now. Real. Jara straightened her torn dress. She wiped her mouth, her eyes hardening back into diamond. Let them come, she said. She turned to the crystal organ, the mirror choir. How does it work? Dax asked, moving to the controls. It reflects truth, Jara said. She placed her hands on the interface. Her starvins flared, the blue light flowing from her skin into the crystal. The machine hummed to life, a deep, vibrating chord that shook the floor. It captures the command signals used by the Council, Jara explained, her voice rising with the power of the machine. And it inverts them. It broadcasts the source code. The drill cut through. The blast doors fell inward with a deafening clang. Sir Kale Varro stepped through the smoke, followed by 4 knights. "Step away from the console!" Kale roared. Dax drew his blaster, standing between the knights and Jara. "Not today." "Tin Man!" Jara screamed as the machine engaged. The light became blinding. A sonic wave erupted from the basilica, passing through the walls, through the hull, beaming directly to the knights' suits. The mirror choir did its job. It didn't just break the signal. It revealed the log. Holographic screens erupted from the knights' armor, projecting their internal data for everyone to see. Kale froze. On the screen floating above his wrist, a classified file opened. Protocol, preemptive failure. Status, executed override code, Judas 9. Command, upon activation of fold bloom, motor functions are to be disabled, targeting systems to be scrambled. Objective, permit abduction. Dax stared at the text. It wasn't a glitch, he whispered. Jara looked at Kale, the light of the truth reflected in her eyes. "You didn't fail." "Kale," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You were turned off." Kale stared at the screen. He read the words. He saw the timestamp. It matched the moment of the abduction perfectly. He fell to his knees. The great Sir Kale Varro, the shield of the Empire, collapsed not from a weapon, but from the weight of the lie. We were the trap," he whispered. Dax lowered his blaster. "The failure was engineered," Dax said, looking at Jara. "They didn't just kidnap you. They made the whole galaxy watch the knights fail so they would lose faith in the old ways. They broke the symbol so they could replace it with the council." Jara looked at the kneeling knights. She looked at the machine that had just screamed the truth to the stars. "And now," she said, her voice cold and dangerous, "we are going to make sure everyone hears it." She turned the dial on the mirror choir to maximum broadcast. The war had just begun. The sanctuary of the Basilica of Echoes was no longer silent. It was filled with the humming accusation of the mirror choir. The holographic screens hovering above Sir Kale Varro's armor continued to scroll, displaying lines of code that dismantled 1,000 years of honor in seconds. Protocol, Judas 9. The text glowed in the air, indifferent and cruel. It detailed how the suits were designed to lock up, how the sensory inputs were rigged to glitch upon specific council frequencies. The Order of the Chrome Halo had not been protectors. They had been theater props. Kale stood in the center of the room, his helmet on the floor, his face gray. The other knights behind him were statues, paralyzed by the sudden annihilation of their identity. "Turn it off," Kale whispered. Jara stood by the crystal console, her hand resting near the control interface. She looked like a wraith in her torn, stained gown, but her posture was iron. "No," she said. Kale looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. He stepped forward, his gauntlets clanking on the stone floor. He did not raise his weapon. He held out his hands, palms up, begging. "You do not understand, Highness. If you broadcast this, if you show the galaxy that the Order is a lie, the Empire collapses not in a year. Tonight, the colonies will revolt. The military will fracture. Billions will die in the chaos." He fell to one knee, the armor screaming against the stone. "Destroy the machine, Jara, please. We can protect you now, we can hide you. But do not burn the world just to prove you are right." Dax watched from the shadows, his blaster loose in his hand. He waited for Jara to waver. He knew the pressure of that choice. The easy lie versus the hard truth. Jara looked down at the kneeling knight. She looked at the code that proved her abduction was a state-sponsored ritual. "You want to protect the peace, Sir Kale?" she asked softly. Yes, Kale breathed. You are confusing peace with silence, Jara said. Her voice sharpened, cutting through the hum of the machine. A peace built on the slavery of a mind is not peace. It is just a well-managed prison. She turned back to the console, her fingers dancing over the crystals. I am not going to hide in a tower while my people are fed lies. I am not a symbol to be kept in a box, Kale. I am the sovereign, and I am going to burn the box. She hit the execution command. The mirror choir fired a data burst. Not to the public yet. She needed a stronger transmitter for that, but to a targeted list of frequencies Dax had flagged. Kale stood up slowly. The desperation in his face hardened into a brittle, hollow resolve. Then you leave us no choice, he said. He put his helmet back on. The faceplate slid shut, erasing the man, leaving only the machine. We will not stop you, Princess, but we cannot help you. If you destroy the order, you destroy us. The knights turned and marched out, disappearing into the warped corridors of the basilica. They were not attacking. They were retreating to await orders, ghosts haunting their own armor. They left the basilica an hour later, stealing a maintenance skiff. They had the data, but they needed a way to shout it across the stars. The council struck back before they even cleared the atmosphere. Dax checked the localized news feed on the skiff's dashboard. His jaw tightened. You might want to look away, he said. Jara leaned over his shoulder. On the screen, a high-definition video was playing. It showed Jara standing in a dimly lit room, whispering conspiratorially to a shadowed figure. I hate them, the digital Jara hissed on screen, her face twisted in a sneer that looked disturbingly real. The people are cattle. I will sell the outer worlds to the humans. I will burn the treaty. The video cut to a grainy shot of Jara and Dax's arms, but the context was twisted. It looked sordid, secretive. The headline screamed, Traitor Princess Seduced by Human Spy. Plot to Destabilize Throne Revealed. Jara stared at the screen. It was her face, her voice, but the words were poison. Deep fakes, Dax said, killing the feed. High-quality ones. They are spinning the narrative. By the time we land, half the planet will want to lynch you. Jara sat back, her hands trembling slightly. They made me look small, petty. They made you look human, Dax corrected. That is what they are afraid of. They need you to be a goddess or a monster. They cannot handle you being a person. He looked at her, seeing the crack in her armor. She had been raised to care what the people thought. This was a direct strike at her foundation. Hey, Dax said. Jara looked at him. Say it, Dax said. Say what? The word I used when the engine stalled? Jara blinked. Bullshit, Dax grinned, louder, with feeling. Bullshit, Jara said, testing the weight of the ugly, human word. It's all bullshit. Jara, Dax laughed, slamming his hand on the dashboard. The video, the council, the knights. It is all smoke and mirrors. You know who you are. Do not let a computer program tell you otherwise. Jara took a deep breath. She looked at the blank screen. Bullshit, she said firmly. That is the spirit, Dax said. Now. Lesson 2. If a reporter shoves a camera in your face and asks if you are sleeping with the enemy, what do you say? Jara thought for a moment. I tell them that the private life of the crown is sacrosanct? Dax groaned. No. You look them in the eye. You smile like a shark, and you say, I am not sleeping with the enemy. I am waking him up. Jara let out a startled laugh. That is terrible. It is effective, Dax countered. Sarcasm is a shield. Princess, use it. Jara smoothed her torn skirt. She looked at Dax, her eyes gleaming with a new, sharp light. "Very well," she said. "Then I shall teach you. If we are to survive this, you cannot walk like a scavenger. You walk like you own the ground." She reached over and adjusted his collar, her fingers lingering. "Chin up, Dax. When you enter a room, you do not look for the exit. You look for the throne, and if anyone blocks you, you stab them with a pen," Dax guessed. Jara smiled, a dangerous, regal curve of her lips. "You thank them for holding your spot. Then you make them move. They needed a team. 2 people against an empire was a tragedy. 5 people was a heist. They met in the rusted underbelly of a mining platform floating in the gas giant's upper atmosphere. The air smelled of sulfur and cheap liquor. Valerius was the first to arrive. He was a former tech for the Chrome Halo, a man with oil permanently stained into his fingerprints and a cynical slouch. He had been discharged for asking too many questions about the neural feedback loops in the helmets. "So," Valerius said, looking at the data pad Dax handed him. "Protocol Judas 9. I knew it. I knew the lag wasn't hardware." "Can you cut the strings?" Dax asked. Valerius spat on the floor. "I can burn the strings. If we can get access to the central broadcast hub, I can upload a patch that severs the obedience channel. But the Knights will not be happy. Waking up from a coma hurts." Next was Senator Vane. He was an older man, his robes frayed, his dignity clinging to him like a desperate perfume. He had been disgraced for opposing the Council's trade embargoes. "Redemption is a steep hill, Princess," Vane said, bowing low to Jara. "But if what you say is true, if the Council is using a biological weapon to enslave the populace, then I will carry your banner to hell." "We do not need you in hell, Senator," Jara said, employing her new sarcasm. "We need you on the Senate floor, shouting louder than their lies." The last recruit was the wildest card, Kalen. Kalen was a pirate linguist, a non-binary voidborn with skin tattooed in star charts and eyes that were entirely black. They spoke 6 dead languages and 3 that were illegal. "You have a noisy signal, human," Kalen said to Dax, tilting their head. "You hum." "Excuse me?" Dax asked. "Your blood." Kalen tapped their own nose. "It sings old songs. We will discuss this later. You need translation for the pre-Empire code in the crown?" "Yes," Jara said. Kalen grinned, revealing teeth filed to points. "I charge in secrets. You owe me 3 good ones when this is over." "Deal," Dax said. The plan was simple and suicidal. The Council controlled the media to break the smear campaign. They needed to hijack the Imperial broadcast spire, a 3-kilometer-high needle of conductive metal that pierced the storm layer of the capital city. The storm was not just weather, it was a security feature. The broadcast spire was shielded against aerial approach. The only way in was to climb the external maintenance panels while the planetary storm raged around them. Dax and Jara clung to the side of the spire, 2,000 meters above the ground. The wind howled like a banshee, threatening to peel them off the metal. "Use the mag clamps," Dax shouted over the thunder. Lightning crawled over the surface of the spire. It wasn't random electricity, it was directed energy, moving in patterns that looked like living script. It was beautiful and lethal. Jara gritted her teeth, hauling herself up another meter. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Her arms burned, every muscle screamed. Below them, the city was a grid of lights, oblivious to the 2 ants crawling up the needle. "Watch the surge!" Valerius's voice crackled in their earpieces. A vein of blue lightning snaked down the panel to Jara's left. She froze, pressing herself flat against the cold metal. The air smelled of ozone and death. The lightning passed inches from her fingers. singing with a high-pitched whine. "You okay?" Dax yelled. "I am fantastic," Jara yelled back. "The view is lovely," Dax laughed, a short bark of sound. "That's the spirit." They reached the access hatch at the 2,500-meter mark. Dax bypassed the lock, his fingers flying over his datapad while clinging to a rung with one arm. The hatch hissed open and they tumbled inside, collapsing onto the great floor. They were in. The interior of the spire was a vertical tunnel of cooling fans and data cables. They climbed to the central node, where Kalen and Valerius were waiting via remote uplink. "Plug me in," Kalen whispered in their ears. Jara connected the data spike. The screens around them lit up. They weren't just accessing the broadcast controls, they were accessing the source files for the symbiote crown. The truth washed over them in a wave of terrifying data. "It is not just a crown," Jara whispered, reading the scrolling text. The files detailed the doctrine of unity. The crown wasn't just designed to control the wearer. It was a biological transmitter. It was meant to link with the atmospheric processors on every major world in the Empire, spreading a pheromonal agent that would bind the population to the monarch's will. "It is a hive mind," Dax said, horror dawning on him. "They want to turn the Empire into a single organism. No dissent, no choice, just unity, a biological contract," Jara said. "And I am the pen they want to use to sign it." They secured the node, planting the logic bomb Valerius had coded. They had 30 minutes before the broadcast window opened. They retreated to a small emergency safe room near the spire's apex to wait. The room was quiet. The roar of the wind was muffled here. It was a sterile white box, smelling of recycled air. Jara sat on a crate, her legs shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, trembling exhaustion. Dax stood by the door, checking his blaster. He looked at her. "We are going to win," he said. Jara looked up. Her eyes were dark, dilated. "And then what?" she asked. "If we win, I have to be Empress. I have to rebuild a world that tried to eat me." "You will be good at it," Dax said. "You have a terrible vocabulary now. The Senate will love you." Jara didn't smile. She stood up and walked over to him. "Dax." He turned. She was close, too close. The air in the room seemed to thicken. "We might not get out of here," she said. "The Council knows we are here. They are sending teams." "I know," Dax said. "I do not want to die wondering," Jara said. She reached out and took the blaster from his hand, setting it on the shelf. Then she took his face in her hands. "Jara, shh." She kissed him. This was not like the kiss in the basilica. That had been desperate. This was deliberate. It was a choice. She pulled him away from the door, backing him toward the wall. Dax went willingly, his hands finding her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent. Dax tasted the storm on her skin. He felt the pulse of the starvins beneath her dress, humming against his chest. He broke the kiss, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. "Jara." "Wait," he rasped. "You are the princess. I am a guy who steals scrap." Jara looked at him, her eyes fierce and unguarded. "Right now," she whispered, "I am not a princess. I am a woman who is tired of being told who she belongs to. I belong to myself, and I am choosing you." Dax searched her face. He looked for hesitation, for trauma response, for anything that said stop. He saw only clarity. He let out a ragged breath. "Okay," he whispered. He kissed her back, and the restraint broke. It was intense, a collision of two lonely orbits finally finding a center. Dax moved with a reverence that belied his hunger. He touched her as if she were made of something rarer than glass. Not because she was fragile, but because she was precious. Jara met him with equal force. She didn't want to be handled gently. She wanted to be held. She wanted the weight of him to ground her, to prove that she was real, that she was here, that she was alive. They sank to the floor, a tangle of limbs and scavenged armor and torn silk. There were no words. The language of the court, of the treaty, of the lie, it all fell away. There was only the friction of skin, the heat of breath, the honest, messy reality of two people finding shelter in each other. Later, they lay tangled together in the quiet. Dax traced the line of a starvin on her arm. "It is not ownership," Jara murmured, her head on his chest. "No," Dax agreed, kissing the top of her head. "It is an alliance. A very good alliance," she added, a smile in her voice. The comms unit beeped, shattering the peace. Dax scrambled up, grabbing his shirt. Jara smoothed her hair, her face flushing but her eyes sharp. It was Kaelin. "We have a problem." The pirate's voice crackled. "And a revelation? Which one do you want first?" "Revelation," Dax said, buckling his belt. "I ran your DNA sequence against the database to bypass the Spire's biolocks," Kaelin said. "Dax, you are not just a random human. Your genetic markers match the Ares expedition." Dax froze. The Ares expedition? That was a ghost story. A human colonization fleet that vanished into the void 500 years before the Empire formed. "They didn't vanish," Kaelin said. "They found something, or were found. They were the original interface subjects. Jara's bloodline was engineered using their tech. Dax, you are the control key. The Starvins are the lock, but your blood is the key that opens the admin privileges. That is why the sigil worked for you." Jara looked at Dax. "You are part of this." "I am a walking password," Dax muttered. "Great. What is the problem?" "The problem," Valerius cut in, his voice strained, "is that they found us." A video feed popped up. It showed the mining platform where they had met. Imperial commandos were storming the room. They had Senator Vane on his knees. A commando held a plasma pistol to the back of his head. "Princess Jara." A cold voice spoke from the feed. It was the Chancellor. "We know you are in the Spire. You have data that belongs to the state. Surrender it and surrender yourself, or the Senator dies." Jara stared at the screen. Vane looked terrified, but he lifted his head. "Do not do it," Vane shouted. "Print the truth." The Chancellor pressed the barrel harder against Vane's skull. "You have 2 minutes." Jara looked at Dax. The choice: if she published the data, the Council would kill Vane. If she surrendered, the truth would die and the Empire would be enslaved. "What do we do?" Dax asked. Jara closed her eyes for a second. She thought about the lesson in the skiff. She thought about the silence versus the peace. "We do not choose," she said, opening her eyes. "We take the third option." "What is the third option?" "We save him," Jara said, "and we burn them down." She hit the comms. "Kaelin, can you bridge the Spire's output to the Commando's local tactical net?" "Maybe," Kaelin said. "Why?" "I am going to speak to them," Jara said. She stood in front of the camera in the safe room. She signaled Dax, "Go live, everywhere." Dax hit the switch. The feed from the Spire hijacked every screen in the Empire, every data pad, every billboard, every holovision. Jara appeared. She was disheveled. Her dress was torn. She looked exhausted, but she looked real. "Citizens of Astrave," she began, her voice steady. "I am Jara Nix, and I am not a traitor. I am a witness." She uploaded the files, the Judas Protocol, the Doctrine of Unity, the proof of the manufactured failure. The files scrolled beside her face on billions of screens. They want to trade a life for this truth, Jara said, looking directly into the camera. They have Senator Vane. They are threatening to kill him because they are afraid of you knowing that they want to take your free will. On the mining platform, the commandos hesitated. Their own HUDs were flashing with the data. They saw the truth. They saw that their own armor might be rigged. The Chancellor screamed on the secure channel. Kill him. Cut the feed. The commando holding the gun wavered. Jara leaned into the camera. Do not let them make you a puppet, she said, her voice fierce. Choose. The commando lowered the gun. It worked. Dax breathed. Jara slumped, relief washing over her. Then the world turned white. It wasn't an explosion, and it was a sensation on a sudden blinding sweetness that tasted like iron and obedience. Jara gasped, clutching her head. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating until the iris vanished. Jara? Dax stepped forward. The Chancellor's voice came over the spire's speakers, calm and terrifying. You think you can outrun your own biology? Child? We anticipated the broadcast. We just needed you to be online to send the activation signal. Trigger authorized. Jara screamed. It was a sound of pure violation. The starvins on her body flared blindingly bright, turning from blue to a harsh, commanding crimson. She fell to her knees, clawing at the floor. Dax rushed to her, grabbing her shoulders. Jara, look at me. Use the sarcasm. Use the anger. Jara looked up. Her face was blank. The fire was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a terrifying, placid calm. I am ready, she said. Her voice was not her own. It was smooth, hollow. No, Dax whispered. No, no, no. Jara stood up. She looked at Dax, the man she had just made love to, the man she had chosen, and she looked through him as if he were furniture. The crown awaits, she said. Dax backed away, horror cold in his veins. The broadcast hadn't saved her. His love hadn't saved her. The technology was inside her. And now, the woman he loved was gone, replaced by the Empress the Council had always wanted. Dax looked at the door. The security locks were disengaging. Council retrieval teams were coming up the lift. He couldn't talk her out of this. He couldn't fight biology with words. He turned and ran for the service hatch. He didn't run to escape. He ran because he realized with a sickening clarity that there was only one way to bring her back. He had to break the machine. And to do that, he had to go to war with her own blood. Dax Rourke was done with speeches. He was done with clever plans. He was done with being the charming rogue. And he was absolutely done with the universe trying to turn the woman he loved into a piece of imperial furniture. He sat in the rear compartment of a stolen troop transport, checking the charge on his blaster for the 10th time. Beside him, Valerius was calibrating a portable logic bomb, his hands steady despite the tremor in the floorboards as they skimmed the surface of the capital's reservoir. Kalen was sharpening a serrated combat knife, humming a tune that sounded like whales weeping in a cathedral. And then there was Sir Kale Varro. The fallen knight sat opposite Dax, still wearing his armor, though the sigils of the chrome halo had been scorched off with a plasma torch. Kale was not humming. He was vibrating with a silent, terrifying frequency of rage. He looked like a man who had realized his entire life was a bad joke and had decided to punch the comedian. We are approaching the aqueduct intake, Kalen announced from the driver's seat. It feeds directly into the palace undercroft. Dax holstered his weapon. Listen, he said, his voice cutting through the engine roar. We are not going in there to negotiate. The council has her. They have activated the biological trigger. She is fighting it. But she is losing. He looked at Kale. You know the layout. Dax said. I know the old layout, Cale replied, his voice sounding like grinding stones. The Undercroft was built by the first emperors. It is not static. It shifts. It is a puzzle box designed to keep things in, not out. Then we break the box, Dax said. He stood up as the transport lurched. He felt the cold weight of the sigil key in his pocket. But heavier than that was the memory of Jara's eyes just before the broadcast cut. Blank. Empty. A house with the lights on and nobody home. He wasn't going to talk her through it. You couldn't talk someone out of a chemical lobotomy. He was going to find the machine that was doing this to her, and he was going to dismantle it, bolt by bloody bolt. Inside the Imperial Palace, the air smelled of lavender and tyranny. Jara Nyx sat on a high-backed chair in the center of the crimson antechamber. She was perfectly still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her posture was impeccable. Inside her mind, she was screaming. The obedience cascade was not a voice telling her what to do. That would have been easy to fight. It was a sensation. It was a warm, golden syrup pouring over her thoughts, smoothing out the jagged edges of her personality. It whispered that submission was rest. It whispered that choice was a burden she no longer had to carry. Stand up, the impulse suggested. Walk to the lab. Jara fought it. She built a wall in her mind. She used bricks made of memory. Brick 1, the smell of ozone in the prison cell. Brick 2, the taste of cheap nutrient paste. Brick 3, Dax's crooked grin when he told her he could fly a brick if it had thrust. Bullshit, she thought, forcing the ugly, jagged word into the smooth golden syrup. It is all bullshit. Your heart rate is elevated, Highness. A medical drone chimed, hovering near her ear. Please relax. The transition is 90% complete. Jara looked at the drone. She wanted to grab it and crush it, but her hands stayed folded. The delay between her will and her body was growing. It used to be a split second. Now it was 2 seconds. Soon, the connection would snap, and she would be a passenger in her own skull. I am relaxed, she said. The voice was not hers. It was melodic, placid, and terrifying. The Undercroft was a nightmare of medieval grandeur and futuristic paranoia. Dax and his team breached the aqueduct seal and dropped into a corridor that looked like the inside of a Gothic cathedral, if the cathedral had been designed by a mad mathematician. The walls were lined with stained glass star maps that glowed with internal light, depicting constellations that had been consumed by black holes eons ago. Silent drones floated near the vaulted ceiling, their sensors sweeping the stone floor. Move! Cale hissed. They sprinted down the hallway, and suddenly the floor shuddered, the walls groaned, the corridor ahead of them twisted, the stone blocks rearranging themselves like the tumblers of a massive lock. The path to the left vanished, replaced by a solid wall of obsidian. It is reconfiguring, Valerius shouted, checking his scanner. The architecture is responding to our threat level. Dax looked at the shifting walls. It wasn't just mechanics, it was psychological warfare. The palace was trying to disorient them, to make them feel small and lost. Kalen, Dax yelled. Which way? The pirate linguist closed their eyes, tilting their head. They weren't looking at the walls, they were listening to the hum of the energy conduits beneath the stone. The power flows to the heart, Kalen said, their eyes snapping open. Left, through the false wall. Dax didn't hesitate. He shoulder-checked the obsidian wall. It shimmered, a hard light hologram disguising a passage, and he stumbled through into a narrow service tunnel. The team followed. They didn't get far before the shadows moved. From the alcoves of the tunnel, figures emerged. They were knights of the chrome halo, but they were not like Cale. Their armor was matte black, and their visors were glowing a flat, lifeless red. Automated. Kale spat, drawing his plasma lance. No pilots, just husks. The hallway erupted into chaos. Dax fired his blaster, the bolts exploding against the shields of the lead knight. It didn't slow it down. The machine advanced, swinging a vibro mace that could shatter a tank. Kale met the charge. He moved with a brutality Dax had never seen. He didn't fight with honor. He fought with hatred. He ducked under the mace, drove his lance into the knee joint of the machine, and ripped upward. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the ancient stone. Traitor. The machine's speakers boomed. I am the only one who is loyal. Kale roared back. He grabbed the machine's helmet with his bare gauntlet and crushed the sensor array. More knights poured in from the rear. Go! Kale shouted to Dax, throwing a drone into a wall. I will hold the choke point. Dax hesitated. There were 6 knights. Kale was one man. Go, you idiot! Kale screamed, blocking a blow that cracked his pauldron. Save her! Dax turned and ran. Valerius and Kalen followed, their boots skidding on the damp stone. Behind them, the sound of tearing metal and Kale's roar echoed in the dark. The political fallout was happening fast. While Dax ran through the dark, the galaxy was burning. Jara's broadcast had done its job. The Judas Protocol files were spreading like a virus. In the Senate Hall, fists were flying. Representatives from the Outer Rim were shouting down the Chancellor's loyalists. 3 planetary governors had already declared secession. The glorious unity the Council wanted was fracturing into 1,000 jagged pieces. But inside the laboratory of the Crown, there was only silence. Dax kicked open the blast doors. He expected guards. He expected a fight. What he found was a theater of the grotesque. The lab was a massive circular chamber located directly beneath the throne room. The walls were lined with tanks containing failed prototypes of the symbiote, twisted lumps of flesh and circuitry floating in amber fluid. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of white marble, sat the symbiote crown. It was not metal. It was a living lattice of red and gold biotech, pulsing with a wet, rhythmic beat. It looked like a heart that had been turned inside out and woven into a diadem. It hummed with a frequency that made Dax's teeth ache. It whispered to him, a low thrum that promised sleep, promised peace, promised an end to the running. Standing before the pedestal was the High Chancellor, and beside him stood Jara. She wore a ceremonial robe of white silk. Her eyes were glazed, staring at the pulsing crown. "Welcome, Mr. Rourke," the Chancellor said. He was a small man, unremarkable, with the face of a grandfather and the eyes of a shark. "You are late for the coronation." Dax raised his blaster. "Step away from her," the Chancellor smiled. "And do what? Shoot me? I am an administrator. Mr. Rourke, I am replaceable. The system is what matters." He gestured to the crown. "Look at it. It is beautiful, is it not? It is the end of conflict. We have spent 10,000 years killing each other over flags and gods and resources. Free will is inefficient. It is messy. Love is chaos. This is order." Dax looked at Jara. "Jara," he said. She didn't blink. "Jara, look at me." The Chancellor laughed softly. "She cannot hear you. The cascade is complete. She is ready to bond." He nodded to Jara. "Proceed, Highness." Jara took a step toward the pedestal. Her movements were fluid, mechanical. She reached out toward the pulsing wet lattice of the crown. Dax felt a cold spike of terror. He fired. The bolt flew true, aimed squarely at the crown. But Jara moved. She spun with impossible speed, catching the plasma bolt on a hard light shield that expanded from her bracelet. She deflected it into the ceiling. She looked at Dax then. Her eyes were still glazed, but there was a flicker of recognition, not of love, but of threat. "Jara, stop!" Dax yelled. She raised her hand. A pulse of telekinetic force, amplified by the starvins in her blood, slammed into Dax. He flew backward, hitting a tank of amber fluid. The glass shattered. He collapsed to the floor, gasping, covered in slime and glass shards. Kalen and Valerius rushed the Chancellor, but automated turrets dropped from the ceiling, pinning them down with suppressing fire. Dax groaned, trying to stand. His ribs felt like they were rubbing together. Jara stood over him. She looked down, her face a mask of serene indifference. "You are a variable," she said. Her voice was flat. "Variables must be eliminated to ensure the equation resolves." She raised her hand again, gathering energy for a lethal strike. Dax looked up at her. He saw the red glow of the starvins. He saw the emptiness. But he also saw the woman who had kissed him in the safe room. The woman who had sworn and learned to say bullshit. "Jara," he wheezed, "I am not a variable." He forced himself to grin. It was a bloody, broken grin, but it was his. "I am the guy who stole your boots, remember?" Jara's hand wavered. The memory was small, stupid, but it was a brick in the wall. Boots, gravity, laughter. The golden syrup in her mind rippled. "Finish him," the Chancellor ordered. Jara blinked. Her left eye twitched. She whispered. "I like you sharp." The phrase slipped out. It wasn't part of the programming. It was an anchor. Dax seized the moment. "I like you sharp too, princess, but right now you are looking a little dull." "Fight it," Jara screamed. It was a sound of agony as her conscious mind declared war on the biological imperative. She grabbed her own head, digging her fingers into her scalp. "Get out of my head." She turned, not toward Dax, but toward the Chancellor. She unleashed the energy she had gathered, not as a precision strike, but as a raw wave of force. The Chancellor was thrown across the room, slamming into the far wall. The turrets malfunctioned, sparking and drooping. Jara fell to her knees, gasping. The red glow in her veins flickered, fighting with the natural blue. Dax scrambled to her. He didn't care about the slime or the blood. He grabbed her face. "Jara?" She looked at him. The glaze was receding, replaced by terror and pain. "Dax," she sobbed, clutching his shirt. "It is so loud. The crown. It is screaming at me to put it on. I cannot hold it back much longer." Dax looked at the crown. It was pulsing faster now, agitated. It sensed its host resisting. "We end this now," Dax said. He helped her up. They stumbled toward the pedestal. "Valerius!" Dax shouted. "The mirror choir! Is the uplink ready?" Valerius was behind a console, typing furiously. "I have the connection, but the crown has a firewall I have never seen. It is biological encryption. I cannot hack it with code." "It is not code," Kalen yelled, firing their pistol at a reinforcements team entering the lab. "It is blood. It needs a genetic handshake." Dax looked at the crown. He looked at his own hand. Kalen said, "I was the key." Dax said, "The Ares expedition." He looked at Jara. "You are the lock," he said. "I am the key. If we interface together, we can open the admin path." Jara shook her head. "It will kill you." The energy surge. "It won't kill me." Dax lied. He took her hand. "But we have to do it together. You have to let me in." "Jara." "Not into the computer. Into you." Jara looked at the crown, then at Dax. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw the resolve. "Okay," she whispered. She placed her hand on the left side of the pulsing lattice. Dax placed his hand on the right. Contact. It wasn't like touching a machine, and it was like touching a raw nerve. Dax gasped as his mind was flooded. He didn't just feel the machine, he felt Jara. He felt her fear, her childhood loneliness, the cold weight of the coronation gown, the warmth of the tea Maria had given her. And underneath it all, he felt her fierce, burning desire to be free. And she felt him. She felt the guilt of the refugee ship. She felt the shame of running. She felt the way he loved her, not as a queen, but as a miracle he was terrified of breaking. The crown shrieked. It recognized the DNA. The Ares markers in Dax's blood unlocked the deep architecture of the device. The red pulse turned white. Valerius shouted over the roar of energy. "I am in. I have root access. I can broadcast the counter-signal through the crown. Do it!" Dax yelled. "Wait!" Valerius hesitated. The fail-safe. "Dax, the screen says the broadcast requires a neural template. What does that mean?" Jara screamed, the energy whipping her hair around her face. "It means the signal is too complex to be synthesized," Valerius cried. "It needs a human mind to structure it. It needs to copy a neural pattern to overwrite the command signal." Dax looked at Valerius. "And what happens to the mind it copies?" Valerius went pale. "It is a destruct, Red. The process burns out the synaptic pathways. It wipes the source." Silence fell in the center of the storm. To break the control, someone had to give up their mind. They would live, perhaps, but they would be a shell, a blank slate. Jara tried to pull her hand away. "No, no, we find another way. There is no other way," the Chancellor screamed from the floor, blood running down his face. "The system demands a sacrifice. That is the price of order." Just then, the blast doors groaned. A figure limped in. It was Sir Kale. He was missing an arm. His armor was a wreck. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. "Use me," he rasped. Kale stumbled forward. He looked at Jara with eyes that were finally clear. "I gave my life to the lie," he said. "Let me give my death to the truth. Hook me up. Wipe me. It is the only penance that fits." Jara looked at him. She saw the knight who had failed her, the man who had been a puppet. "No," she said firmly. "Princess," Kale begged, "I will not build my kingdom on the bones of my friends." "Kale," Jara shouted, "I am done with knights dying for me." She looked at Dax. "We destroy it," she said. "We blow it up. If we blow it up, the signal stops, but the network remains," Dax said quietly. "The council will just build another one. They will enslave the next generation." He looked at the crown. He felt the connection to the network. He saw the billions of minds teetering on the edge of slavery. He looked at Jara. He grinned. It wasn't his usual crooked smirk. It was soft. It was brave. It was courage without costume. "I am not a knight," he said. "Dax, don't you dare," Jara warned, her voice rising in panic. "I am a mechanic," Dax said. "And when a part is broken, you replace it." He didn't give her time to argue. He didn't give her time to stop him. He twisted his hand inside the lattice, grabbing the core. He used his mental connection to slam the command into the system. Source, Dax Rourke. Authorization, Ares Alpha. Execute protocol, Mirror Choir. "Dax!" Jara screamed. The machine grabbed him. It wasn't pain. It was light. It was a blinding white ocean of data crashing into his skull. He felt his memories being pulled out, the taste of cheap whiskey, the sound of the rain on his ship, the color of Jara's eyes. They were being ripped away to build the signal. He screamed, his back arching. "No!" Jara yelled. She didn't let go. She should have let go. The feedback could kill her, but she dug her fingers into the lattice. "If you take him," she roared at the machine, her voice vibrating with the power of the Starvins. "You take us both." She poured her own energy into him. She used the Starvins not to interface with the machine, but to anchor Dax. She wrapped her mind around his. holding on to his memories as the machine tried to eat them. I am Jara, she projected into the storm, and you do not steal from me. The lab exploded with light. Dax felt his mind fragmenting, turning into a broadcast signal. He heard the alien echoes of the mirror choir flooding his consciousness, singing the song of freedom. He looked at Jara one last time. He saw her bleeding starlight from her eyes, her nose, her skin. She looked terrifying and beautiful. Dax, she thought, her voice in his head. Hold on. I got you, he thought back, though he wasn't sure if he existed anymore. With a final guttering roar, Dax forced the signal out. The symbiote crown shattered. It didn't break into pieces, it dissolved. The living lattice turned to gray ash, crumbling in their hands. The shockwave knocked them both backward. Dax hit the floor and didn't move. Jara landed hard, rolling to a stop. She pushed herself up, her vision swimming. The red glow was gone from her veins, replaced by the soft, steady blue. The silence in the lab was absolute. The hum was gone. The whisper was gone. Dax, Jara whispered. She crawled over to him. He was lying on his back, his eyes closed. He wasn't breathing. Jara placed her hands on his chest. She didn't know CPR. She didn't know medicine. She only knew that she refused to live in a universe where he didn't exist. She pressed her hands over his heart and shoved a pulse of pure bioelectric energy into him. Breathe, you idiot, she commanded, tears streaming down her face mixing with the starlight. Breathe! Dax's body jerked. He sucked in a ragged, desperate breath. He coughed, turning his head to spit out blood. He lay there for a long moment, wheezing, his chest heaving. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes. They were unfocused at first. Then they found her face. He blinked. He frowned. He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her cheek. Did we win? He rasped. His voice was thin, fragile. Jara let out a sob that was half laugh. Yes, Dax. We broke it. Dax closed his eyes again. A faint, tired smile touched his lips. Good, he whispered, because I think I forgot how to fly the ship. He passed out, but his heart, beating slow and steady under Jara's hand, was the loudest, most beautiful sound in the world. The silence that fell over the empire of Ostrave was louder than any explosion. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a stopped heart suddenly kicking back into rhythm. Across 12 systems, the neural web disintegrated. In the cockpits of chrome halo knights fighting on the moons of Jupiter, the red haze of the command signal vanished, leaving men and women blinking at their own hands, wondering why they were killing people they had sworn to protect. In the Senate, the droning, hypnotic cadence of the council's subvocal broadcasts cut out, leaving politicians standing in awkward, confused clumps, remembering that they used to have opinions of their own. In the ruins of the laboratory of the Crown, Dax Rourke opened his eyes. The world was too bright. The air tasted of ozone and burnt sugar. But it was the sound that overwhelmed him. It wasn't sound in the traditional sense. It was a cacophony of intent. He could hear the hum of the ventilation system, but underneath it, he felt the system's purpose: to circulate air. He looked at the medical drone hovering over him. He didn't just see a machine, he felt its programming, a desperate binary desire to repair biological tissue. Dax groaned, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. Turn it down, he rasped. Jara was there instantly. She was kneeling beside him, her white ceremonial robe ruined, stained with black oil and his blood. Her face was scrubbed clean of the makeup, revealing the exhaustion and the raw, terrifying relief underneath. Turn what down? She asked, gripping his shoulder. Dax, Can you hear me? I can hear everything, Dax whispered. He lowered his hands and looked at her. He flinched. When he looked at her, he didn't just see Jara. He saw a kaleidoscope of truth. He saw the fear pulsing in her carotid artery. He saw the love radiating from her like heat from a sun, so intense it almost burned his retinas. He saw the fragment of the mirror choir that had lodged itself in his frontal lobe, a shimmering alien echo that vibrated against his own thoughts. "You are scared," Dax said, his voice rough. "You are scared that I am brain dead. You are scared that you have to run an empire. And you are scared that I am going to leave." Jara froze. She hadn't said any of that. "How do you know that?" she whispered. Dax tapped his temple. It hurt. "The machine left a door open," he said. "I can hear the music, Jara. I can hear the lies. And right now, the only thing quiet in this room is you, because you are not lying." Jara stared at him. She realized then what the cost had been. He hadn't just broken the code, he had absorbed it. He was a human lie detector, a tuning fork for the galaxy's honesty. "I am not going anywhere," she said, her voice fierce and solid. Dax closed his eyes, letting the truth of her words wash over him like cool water. "Good," he murmured, "because I think I owe a pirate 3 secrets and I can't remember any of them. They didn't go to the infirmary." Jara refused. She walked out of the undercroft, supporting Dax with one arm, looking like a queen of ashes. They emerged into the great hall of the palace. It was chaos. Loyalists were surrendering, senators were shouting. The air was thick with panic. When Jara entered, the noise died. She didn't look like the pristine image on the currency chips. She looked dangerous. She walked to the center of the room, stepped up onto the dais where the chancellor usually stood, and kicked the podium over. The crash echoed through the hall. "Get a camera," she ordered. A terrified press drone floated down. "Do not filter it," Jara said, pointing a blood-stained finger at the lens. "Do not add the halo effect. Do not smooth my voice. Broadcast it raw." The red light on the drone blinked. "Citizens of the Empire," Jara said. Her voice was raspy, tired, and completely devoid of the royal cadence. "I am not going to read you a speech written by a committee. I am going to tell you the truth, and the truth is ugly." She held up the remnants of the symbiote crown, which she had carried out of the lab. It was a handful of gray dust. "This was your god," she said. "It was a leash. The Council of 9 Lanterns did not want to protect you. They wanted to herd you. They engineered the failure of the Knights. They manufactured the war with the humans. They turned me into a weapon to aim at your heads." A gasp rippled through the room. "I was afraid," Jara admitted, looking directly into the lens. "I was a coward. I let them put me in a box because it was easier than fighting. But I am done with easy." She looked at the senators, at the generals, at the people watching on billions of screens. "The council is gone. The crown is dust. If you want an empress who sits on a throne and looks perfect, you should revolt now because that woman is dead. I am what is left. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever owns you again." She cut the feed. The silence held for 3 seconds. Then, it broke. Not with applause, but with a roar of questions, of shouts, of a society waking up from a long, drugged sleep. Dax watched her from the shadows of a pillar. He leaned against the stone, feeling the hum of the mirror choir in his head subside slightly. He watched her handle the shouting mob with a sharp, terrifying grace. He grinned. It was a pained expression, but it was real. "She is going to be trouble," he whispered to himself. In the corner of the hall, Sir Cale Varro sat on the floor. He had refused medical treatment for his missing arm. He simply sat there, staring at the floor, waiting for the executioner. Jara found him an hour later. She had finally let the medics clean her wounds, though she refused to change out of her ruined dress. "Get up, Cale," she said. Cale looked up. His eyes were dead. "Why?" he asked hollowly. "The tribunal is coming. I led the order that betrayed you. I hunted you. Just give me the mercy of a quick bolt." "You want to be a martyr," Jara said, her voice cold. "You want to die tragically so you do not have to look at what you did." Cale flinched. It was the truth. Dax, standing behind Jara, could hear the resonance of it in the air like a struck bell. "I deserve death," Cale whispered. "You deserve consequences," Jara corrected. She reached down and grabbed his remaining pauldron, hauling him to his feet. "Dying is easy. Cale. Living with the guilt, waking up every morning and seeing the faces of the people we failed. That is hard. That is the penance." She looked him in the eye. "I am dissolving the Order of the Chrome Halo. It will be rebuilt. Volunteers only. No neural links, no hidden protocols. Just men and women standing between the darkness and the light. I need a commander who knows where the traps are buried." Cale stared at her, shock cracking through his despair. "You cannot mean me." "I hate you right now," Jara admitted frankly. "But I know you. And I know you will work harder than anyone else to wash the stain off your soul. Do not die for me, Cale. Live for them." She gestured to the crowd outside the palace gates. Cale looked at the crowd. He looked at his missing arm. He looked at Jara. Slowly, painfully, he straightened his spine. He didn't bow. He simply nodded. "As you command," he rasped. Jara turned to leave. Dax fell into step beside her. "That was brutal," Dax noted. Jara sighed, rubbing her temples. "Mercy is heavy. Dax, sometimes you have to drop it on people to make them feel it. They thought it was over, but the universe," Dax had learned, "loved a sequel." Kalen intercepted them in the corridor, looking frantic. Their tattoos were shifting rapidly, a sign of extreme distress. "One got away," Kalen said. "Who?" Dax asked. "Lord Vexer, the architect of the symbiote code. He made it to the royal hangar. He is powering up a prototype slip ship." Dax checked his blaster. It was empty. He threw it away and grabbed a stun baton from a fallen guard. "Of course he is," Dax muttered. "Because why would we get a lunch break?" They ran. They burst into the hangar just as the engines of the slip ship flared blue. It was a sleek, needle-shaped vessel, designed for deep void transit. "He is not trying to jump to hyperspace," Valerius yelled over the comms. "He is opening a localized fold bloom inside the atmosphere." "He is insane," Jara shouted. "That will tear the hangar apart," the air in the hangar screamed. The light bent. The familiar sickly violet flower of the fold bloom opened at the end of the runway. Vexer's ship shot forward, diving into the distortion. Dax looked at Jara. There was a second ship on the pad, a heavy interceptor. "Shotgun," Dax called. Jara was already in the pilot's seat before he finished the word. They launched. The G-force slammed Dax back as Jara gunned the thrusters, chasing Vexer into the mouth of the anomaly. They didn't enter space. They entered somewhere else. The interior of the fold bloom was a corridor of surrealism. It was a tunnel made of memory and light. Outside the cockpit glass, Dax saw moments of history playing out on loops. He saw the coronation, but the banners were flying upward. He saw the crash on the relic planet, but the smoke was being sucked back into the fire. The music of the coronation was playing, but it was backward. A haunting, dissonant swelling of brass and strings that sounded like a funeral dirge played in reverse. "He is trying to navigate the time eddies," Dax shouted, clutching his head. The mirror choir fragments in his brain were screaming at the violation of physics. Jara's hands flew over the controls. She wasn't flying with instruments. She was flying with instinct. "I have him," she said through gritted teeth. She fired the grapple beams. Not missiles. She wouldn't risk an explosion in here, but magnetic tethers. The beams latched onto Vexor's ship. The two vessels jerked violently. Jara slammed the reverse thrusters. The strain on the hull was immense. Metal groaned. The backward music swelled to a deafening crescendo. "Pull!" Dax yelled. Jara pulled. She dragged Vexor's ship back from the edge of the event horizon, back through the tunnel of distorted time, back into the reality of the hangar. They crashed out of the fold bloom, skidding across the deck plates in a shower of sparks. The anomaly snapped shut behind them with a sound like a thunderclap. Silence returned. Dax kicked open the airlock. He and Jara stormed over to Vexor's crashed ship. Vexor crawled out of the wreckage. He was a tall, elegant man, now covered in soot. He looked up at them with a sneer. "Finish it," he spat. "Show everyone that you are just as violent as we were. Kill me." Jara stood over him. She held a plasma pistol she had pulled from the interceptor's rack. The barrel hummed with lethal heat. Dax watched her. He heard the intent in her mind. It was a dark, jagged desire for revenge. This man had tried to enslave her. He had tried to erase her. He stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. "Jara." She didn't look at him. She stared at Vexor. "He deserves it," she whispered. "Yes," Dax said. "He does. But if you kill him now, without a trial, you are just a council of one." He squeezed her arm. Power that mirrors cruelty becomes cruelty. "Jara, you told me that once, in the cell. Or maybe you thought it. I can't tell the difference anymore." Jara trembled. She looked at Vexor's sneering face. She looked at the gun. Then she looked at Dax. She saw the reflection of herself in his eyes. Not a goddess, not a monster, just a woman holding a gun. She disengaged the safety and fired. The bolt slammed into the deck plate inches from Vexor's head. He flinched, terrified. Jara tossed the gun to Dax. "Arrest him," she said, her voice steady. "Put him in a glass cell in the center of the Capitol. Let everyone see him. Let everyone hear his trial. I am not afraid of him anymore." She turned and walked away, leaving the vengeance on the floor. Dax watched her go. He felt a swell of admiration so strong it nearly knocked him over. "That is my girl," he murmured. 3 weeks later. The galaxy was still loud, but it was a better kind of noise. It was the noise of reconstruction. Dax sat on a balcony overlooking the Capitol. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. He was eating a slice of something that resembled pizza, though the cheese was blue. Jara stepped out onto the balcony. She was wearing simple clothes, trousers and a tunic, no gown, no jewelry. "You are hiding," she said, sitting beside him. "I am strategically withdrawing," Dax corrected. He offered her a bite of the blue pizza. "It is surprisingly good, tastes like chicken and math." Jara took a bite and grimaced. "It tastes like algae." She leaned back, looking at the city. The holographic billboards that used to display propaganda were now showing debates, news reports, and terrible advertisements for laundry detergent. "They want a wedding," Jara said quietly. "Who?" "Everyone. The Senate, the press. My aunt from the Nebula sector who I haven't seen in 10 years. They want a royal wedding, a symbol of the new era." Dax chewed slowly. "And what do you want?" Jara turned to him. She moved closer, invading his personal space in that way that made his heart stutter. I want this, she said. I want quiet. I want blue pizza. I want to sit next to you without wondering if you are trying to gain leverage. She reached out and touched his face. Is it hard? She asked softly. Hearing the truth all the time? Dax leaned into her touch. It is noisy. Walking through a crowd is like walking through a thunderstorm. Everyone is lying about something, their age, their happiness, their lunch. He looked into her eyes. But then I come here, and you are quiet. You are the only quiet thing in the world. Jara. Jara smiled. It wasn't a royal smile, and it was shy, intimate. I love you, she said. Dax froze. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He waited for the dissonance. He waited for the scratch of a lie, the waver of hesitation. There was nothing. Just a pure, resonant chord of absolute truth. It overwhelmed him. His eyes stung. I know, he whispered. I can hear it. It sounds like a bell that never stops ringing. I love you too, he added. Jara laughed. I know. You are very loud, Dax Rourke. She pulled him in. The kiss was slow, deep, and grounded. It wasn't a desperate cling for survival. It was a claiming. It was two people carving out a sanctuary in a universe that wanted to consume them. We are not having a wedding, Jara whispered against his lips. No. No. We are going to sign the papers at the clerk's office like normal citizens. Then we are going to steal a ship and go to the beach for a week. Steal a ship? Dax grinned. I knew I was a bad influence. The best influence, she promised. The reforms were swift and surgical. Jara dissolved the hidden intelligence branches of the council. She opened the archives, releasing terabytes of suppressed history. She invited a human delegation to the capital, not as protected subjects, but as ambassadors. Dax stood by her side through it all. He refused the title of Prince Consort. He refused the title of Duke. I am the advisor, he told the confused clerks. Advisor on what? They asked. Advisor on reality checks, Dax answered. He became the man in the back of the room who leaned back in his chair and asked the uncomfortable questions. When a senator proposed a bill that sounded too good to be true, Dax would wince and say, I am hearing a lot of static on that one. Senator. The bill would usually be withdrawn. He was the troublemaker, the grounded wire, the man who reminded the Empress to eat, to sleep, and to laugh when the pomp and circumstance became too ridiculous. 6 months after the fall of the council, a new ceremony was held. It was in the same plaza where the abduction had happened. But the energy barriers were gone. The floating dais was lowered to the ground. There were no armed knights standing guard. Jara stood before her people. She wore a simple dress of white and gold. The starvins on her skin were visible, glowing softly, no longer a mark of shame or a tool of control, but a part of who she was. Dax stood a few steps behind her, wearing a suit that actually fit, though he had refused to wear a tie. The ceremony was short, a reaffirmation of rights, a promise of transparency. When it was over, the crowd didn't just cheer, they surged forward, not to attack, but to touch hands, to speak, to connect. Jara navigated the sea of people with a smile that reached her eyes. She stopped to talk to a mechanic. She laughed at a child's joke as the sun began to set, painting the sky in that familiar violet hue. They walked back toward the palace steps. Jara stopped and looked at Dax. Dax stopped, hands in his pockets. What? Jara looked at the plaza. She looked at the spot where the fold bloom had opened. Why did you grin? She asked suddenly. Dax blinked. When? That day. On the dais. just before they took me. You looked at me, and you murmured something, and then you grinned. Everyone else was screaming. You grinned? Why? Dax looked at the plaza. He remembered the feeling of the nutrient stick in his hand. He remembered the smell of the ozone. He remembered the look in her eyes, incandescently alive. He looked at Jara now. She was stronger. She was scarred. She was free. He smiled. It wasn't the sharp, crooked grin of a con artist anymore. It was softer. It was the smile of a man who had bet everything on a long shot and won. Because, Dax said quietly, I saw a princess surrounded by the most powerful knights in the galaxy, and none of them knew how to actually save her. He stepped closer, taking her hand. They were fighting the script. Jara. They were trying to be heroes. I didn't want to be a hero. He squeezed her fingers. I just wanted to try anyway. Jara squeezed back. You did more than try. Human. Dax looked at the horizon, where the first stars were appearing, a vast open galaxy full of trouble and wonder. The grin widened, returning to its old mischievous glory. Yeah. Well, he said. I had a good co-pilot. Jara laughed, a sound that rang clearer than the bells of the relic world. Come on, advisor, she said, pulling him toward the palace. We have a meeting with the human ambassador, and I believe you promised to teach me how to cheat at cards. Dax followed her, his heart beating in perfect, honest rhythm with hers. That, Highness, is a state secret. They walked up the steps together, leaving the shadows behind them, stepping into a future that was unwritten, messy, and entirely their own. The grin stayed on Dax's face, once a shield against the dark, now a promise to the light.